So far, we have discussed about uh, fundamental aspects of food and nutrition. After that, we discussed about uh, nutritional assessment methods. Under that, if you can remember, we discussed about direct nutritional assessment methods as well as indirect nutritional assessment methods. So after that, we have discussed about nutritional importance of major biomolecules, particularly carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and dietary fiber. So I will start discussing about the nutritional importance of major biomolecules from this lecture onward. Okay. Then since I have done biochemistry for you in 1-2 semester, I know we have covered a significant portion on the biochemical aspects of these macromolecules. Therefore, I will not much concern about the biochemical aspects. I will focus on the nutritional aspects of these biomolecules. That is what we are supposed to do in this course. Okay. And if you can remember, if I ask you, what is meant by carbohydrates? Or what are carbohydrates? What's your answer? How do you define carbohydrates?
Carb
Yes,
Carbohydrate
carbohydrates.
is a combination of monosaccharides.
Yes.
A polymer of simple sugars.
A polymer of simple sugars. For disaccharides and polysaccharides, it's yes. If we simply define the carbohydrates, carbohydrates are biomolecules consisting of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Okay. Then carbohydrates are macromolecules. And if you can remember, uh, lipids also containing carbon, hydrogen, oxygen as they are elements. Then what is the basic difference between carbohydrates and lipids? As Veera Singh mentioned in the chat, biomolecule consists of oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon. Yes, it's true. Then I have a question for you. What is the difference between carbohydrate and lipids? Always the
Hydrogen is
hydrogen to oxygen ratio of carbohydrates is 2 to 1. But for lipids, it's higher than that. That's the basic difference between carbohydrate and lipids. Okay. In you know these things. You have learned about these things under biochemistry. The empirical formula of carbohydrate is CxH2O y, and as uh, shown here, the hydrogen to oxygen ratio is 2 to 1. Okay, then X and Y may uh, not be equal, maybe or may not be equal, and range in value from 3 to 12 or more. And based on that, we categorize carbohydrates. You know the categorization, classification of carbohydrate. We can classify carbohydrates into monosaccharides. What are the categorizations? Monosaccharides, disaccharides, and
Polysaccharides.
polysaccharides. And apart in between disaccharides and polysaccharides, we can define a category called oligosaccharides. So what is meant by oligosaccharides? In monosaccharides, there is only one monomer. Okay. Then in disaccharides are comprised of two monomers, two single units. Then oligosaccharides, there are 3 to 9 monomers. Usually, we call oligosaccharides for the carbohydrates which have 3 to 9 monomer units. Then exceeding 9 monomer units for in a carbohydrate, we call it as polysaccharides. Okay, then these are the basic classification of carbohydrates. Okay, then I think this is clear for you. Then if I ask what are the functions of carbohydrates in human, what can you say? What are the basic functions of carbohydrates?
Provide energy.
Yes, that is the most important function of carbohydrates in human. Apart from providing energy, what are other functions of carbohydrates? In human, particularly in us, in our body, what is our storage carbohydrate or storage energy form?
Glycogen.
Glycogen. Yes.
Glycogen.
The carbohydrate act as energy storage in human. Apart from that, it helps to build macromolecules like RNA, DNA, and ATP and NADPH. In RNA and DNA, there are pentose sugar group, that is ribose or deoxyribose. So these pentose sugar units are carbohydrates or monosaccharides. So building some biological importance molecules, it is a function of carbohydrates. Apart from that, carbohydrates require to spare proteins and lipid. In protein and lipid regulation, in some cases we need carbohydrate. It means when there is not enough carbohydrates, we use protein to generate glucose. On the other hand, when there is excess carbohydrates, we convert carbohydrates into lipids. So in sparing proteins and lipids, we require carbohydrates. And in this case, in nutrition, when we talk in the nutritional importance of carbohydrate, the major nutritional role of carbohydrate is to provide energy. As you know, 1 gram of carbohydrate can produce 4 kilocalorie of energy. Then if we say it in terms of kilojoule, it's 17 kilojoule per gram. And our brain cannot use lipids or proteins as our energy source. Therefore, we need simple sugars to generate energy for our brain. So we need to definitely get carbohydrates as our major energy source. As you know, lipids and proteins can provide more energy than carbohydrates, but in some cases, particularly for our brain, we cannot use lipids or proteins as our energy source. So we require carbohydrate in that case. And the level of the glucose in the blood must be constantly maintained. It have to be regulate the glucose level in our blood. And apart from this, the major role we can say that these 4 functions, as basic functions of carbohydrates, as the primary energy source, as energy storage, and building macromolecules, and sparing proteins and lipids. In nutrition, the major role of carbohydrate is to provide energy. Okay. So Then what can you say about the recommended carbohydrate intake of human? Is there any fixed value for carbohydrate daily carbohydrate intake for human or adults or children? It totally depends on the person. Okay, we can suggest that in our diet 45 to 65% of our daily intake shall come from carbohydrates. Okay, and the calorie requirement is depend on the person to person. So the calorie or energy requirement for infant is different from a matured adult, and also it depend on the age groups. Okay, then we cannot exactly say we have to eat this much of carbohydrate in order to fulfill our requirements. We cannot say that. It depends on the our energy requirement. Okay, nutritionists recommend that 45 to 65% of a person's daily calorie intake shall come from carbohydrates. Okay, for example, if someone require 2,000 calories a day, between 900 to uh, 1,300 calories shall come from carbohydrates. That translate to between 225 to 335 gram carbohydrates a day. And you should know that, as I mentioned, uh, the carbohydrate intake depends on the person. Okay, then this value can be changed for pregnant women and elderly people and children and adults, as well as the based on the gender and their uh, the behavior or the activities they involve. Okay, then we cannot say that exact value for uh, recommended carbohydrate intake for human. Okay, what we can say is uh, from our daily calorie intake, 45 to 65% of that daily calorie intake should fulfill from carbohydrate. Okay, is that clear? Is that clear?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Then,
Clear, sir.
then if we consider what will happen for carbohydrates in our body, we usually eat more carbohydrates than our body can immediately use in our diets. It's uh, quite obvious. Our main, our staple food is rice. It is a carbohydrate rich food, and we usually eat rice uh, high amount of rice per day, and it is more than our daily intake, the daily requirement for energy. So usually, generally, about 50% of the carbohydrate we ingest used for immediate energy. Okay, then about 10% is stored in the muscle and liver as glycogen. So this is the stored form of carbohydrate in human, and approximately 40% is stored as fats, triglycerides, and cholesterol. So that is what happened to carbohydrate in our body. You know that you have learned about metabolism of uh, biomolecules in biochemistry. So you know how the carbohydrate turn into energy. You have learned about TCA cycle and the electron uh, system and other metabolic pathways that translate glucose into ATP. Okay, then from our daily intake of carbohydrate, at about 50% used for immediate energy. It means to form ATP. And about 10% is stored in the muscle and liver as glycogen, which is the stored carbohydrate form in human. And approximately 40% is stored as fats, triglycerides, and cholesterol. Okay, that is the fate of carbohydrates um, in the human body. Okay, so in general terms, we can further classify carbohydrates as simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Okay, simple carbohydrates, usually we refer simple carbohydrates as uh, two monosaccharides and disaccharides, and as complex carbohydrates for polysaccharides. This is a basic classification, and there is no solid scientific background behind this. But in the nutrition, we highly rely on this classification: simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Okay, simple carbohydrates, in other terms, are sugars that enter the bloodstream rapidly and provide quick energy. Okay, then the monosaccharides and disaccharides can uh, provide rapid or quick energy in the human body. On the other hand, complex carbohydrates supply longer lasting energy as well as other nutrients and fiber that the body needs. Okay, then through this lecture, you will understand that these complex carbohydrates can bind with other nutrients such as fiber and uh, macronutrients such as vitamins and minerals. So it is recommended to eat a lot complex carbohydrates rather than simple carbohydrates. So you will uh, understand the reason for that in this lecture. The basic difference between a simple and complex carbohydrate is in how quickly it is digested and absorbed, as well as chemical structure. Okay, then as I mentioned, there is no solid scientific uh, background behind this classification, but in nutrition, we use this classification a lot to describe some aspects. Okay, you should know this. You you should know that. That's why I mentioned here. And if we consider simple carbohydrates, they are monosaccharides and disaccharides, and they do not usually supply any other nutrient or fiber. Usually, they are not bound with other nutrients, other micronutrients such as vitamins and minerals. So they do not usually supply any other nutrients to body. And the sources of simple sugars are fruit juices, honey, milk, and sugars added to processed foods like cookies, candies, or drinks. They usually contain simple sugars. Okay. Then these are a few type of simple sugars that we have in particular food products. The glucose or blood sugar is the basic source of energy for all living things. It is well-known thing. Then it is a type of simple sugar, and sucrose or table sugar made from sugar beets or sugar cane. And fructose is the sugar found in fruit, honey, and vegetables. And maltose produced from breakdown of starch, and lactose present in lactose is considered as the milk sugar. Then what is the carbohydrate available in breast milk? What is the carbohydrate? What is the form of carbohydrate available in breast milk? Breast milk
Lactose.
contain, yes, lactose.
Lactose.
Yes,
Lactose.
lactose. So then infants or newborn children, they use lactose as their primary energy source. Then you know that lactose is comprised of two monosaccharides, and it break down into two monosaccharides and use for the energy. Okay, in infant particularly. Okay, then these are simple sugars. Then when it comes to complex carbohydrates, then usually we refer complex carbohydrates as polysaccharides, and starch and dietary fiber are considered complex carbohydrates. You will learn that dietary fiber are a type of complex carbohydrates. Okay, actually, I will explain that later. Um, and the complex carbohydrates are made out of sugars that are linked together chemically to form long chains. That means polysaccharides. And these are the major sources of complex carbohydrates: grains, fruits and vegetables, rice, and cereals. Okay. Then the basic difference between complex carbohydrates and the simple carbohydrates is that complex carbohydrates provide long-lasting energy. It will not quickly absorb and digest it. It takes some time. But on the other hand, simple carbohydrates, they are quickly digested and used to provide quick energy. Okay, that is the basic difference between complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates. Okay. Apart from this classification, there are something called sugar alcohols. Have you heard about sugar alcohols? Then the sugar alcohols, they are not complex carbohydrates or simple carbohydrates. They are not categorized under either simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrate. They are a type of carbohydrate used as replacement for sugar. Sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol like things are called sugar alcohols. Okay, they do not completely absorb into the bloodstream from the small intestine, and they do not have caloric or energy value. And these type of sugar alcohols are heavily used nowadays in the food industry as replacement for sugars. It means fructose. And
So,
for
do they use for the diabetic patients
yes, yes,
as alternatives?
yes, they are used for diabetic patients as a alternative. Okay, then there are some adverse effects of uh, these sugar alcohols because uh, the high intake of these sugar alcohols does not produce energy in our body. Okay, and as well as they are not uh, absorbed to our bloodstream. Just the role of that sugar alcohol is uh, to produce sweet taste. Okay, then in recent years, government has imposed lots of tax on sugar. Okay, then we have to talk about that because it's relate relate to our topic, carbohydrates. Then you know sugars are carbohydrates. Then government in Sri Lanka have imposed lots of tax on sugars, and their claim was we the government is intended to reduce the risk of being obese and diabetes of people in Sri Lanka. Okay, then what's your opinion? Is it a good thing? මෑතකදී මම හිතන්නේ මම දන්නේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ එවයාද කියලා මේ ගවර්න්මන්ට් එක ගොඩක් ලොකු ටැක්ස් එකක් පැනෙවුවා මෑතකදී මේ අවුරුදු දෙකක වගේ කාලය තුල sugar වලට සීනි වලට ඒක හොඳයිද නරකද ගවර්න්මන්ට් එක ක්ලේම් කරන්නේ ඒගොල්ලෝ ඒක කරන්නේ මේ ඩයබටිස් patients ලා වැඩියෙන් report වෙනවා ඒක අඩු කරන්න කියලා. Then what is your opinion as food science students? Is it good or bad?
It will not affect the consumption of the people.
It will not affect the consumption of people. Yes, to some extent. Apart from that, what else?
Sugar is not the only method that people get sugar for their bodies.
Okay, sugar is not the
Yeah.
only thing. Flour, then wheat flour, some bakery products. Most of the bakery products heavily rely on wheat flour, and we consume a lot of bakery products. So yes, it's true. And RMLA M.A.L. Ratnayake mentioned asked a question. So stevia is a sugar alcohol. Yes, stevia is a kind of sugar alcohol. And එතකොට මොකක්ද ඔයගොල්ලෝ හිතන්නේ ඒක හොඳයිද නරකයිද? ඒ decision එක. What's your opinion? Is it a good decision with regard to nutrition, or a kind
The
of
reason is not good. Sir. Reason is not good, sir.
recently it's not good? Yes, it's in our point of view, nutritional point of view, it's very bad decisions because we are kind of poor country, and our major energy source is sugar. Okay, sugar as well as rice, and we know that Sri Lankan people drink a lot of tea. Actually, they are not tea. We used to drink a lot of sugar with tea. Okay, then if we impose a lot of tax to sugar, it means it block a major energy source for poor people. So in a nutritional point of view, it's a very bad decision. Okay, we have to consider about that. Okay, මොකද මේ ලංකාව කියලා කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍ය අපි කියන්නේ මේ තාම දිනුවෙන් පවතින රටක් ඒ වගේම දුප්පත් රටක්. ගොඩක් මිනිස්සු ඉන්නවා මේ ගොඩක් දුප්පත් කට්ටිය. එතකොට අපිට තියෙන ප්‍රධානම එනර්ජි සෝස් එක තමයි සීනි. අපි අප්‍රිකාවයි සහ අනිත් රටවල වලින් වෙනස් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ malnutrition එකත් එක්ක එනර්ජි malnutrition එකත් එක්ක මේ මෙන්න මේ අපි ගොඩක් තේ බොනවා. ඒ වගේම අපි අපේ ප්‍රධාන ආහාරය බත්. එතකොට මේ දෙකම හොඳ කාබෝහයිඩ්‍රේට් සෝස්. එතකොට මේ සීනි කියන එක විශේෂයෙන්ම ඕන කෙනෙක්ට මේ easily ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන් දෙයක්. එතකොට මේක unavailable කරනවා කියලා කියන්නේ ඒක ගොඩක් නරක දෙයක් nutrition පැත්තේ. Yes, it's true. We have to consider about the diabetic patterns, but as you mentioned, it is not the only source for diabetes. The sedentary lifestyle is the main cause for diabetes. But imposing lot of tax on sugar is not definitely not the solution for that. Okay, ගොඩක් කට්ටිය හිතන්නේ නැති දෙයක්. මම හිතන්නේ government එකක් කරන්නේ ඒක ඒගොල්ලන්ට tax money වැඩි කරගන්න. නමුත් ඒක ගොඩක් නරක දෙයක්. මේ පැත්තෙන් හිතුවොත් එහෙම. Okay. Then what we refer as good carbohydrates, the complex carbohydrates, we refer as good carbohydrates, and we refer as bad carbohydrates the foods with or the carbohydrate sources with refined carbohydrates. What is meant by refined carbohydrates? Refined carbohydrates refer to carbohydrates that have been processed. Okay, in the refining process, other nutrients are removed. Okay, for example, then grain is a good source of carbohydrates. In whole grain, it contains bran, endosperm, as well as germ. The bran and the germ are the most nutritious part of the whole grains. It contains high amount of many nutrients such as fiber, vitamin B, iron, magnesium, potassium, and selenium like minerals. And during the refining process, the bran as well as the germ are removed uh, along with the all the nutrients containing in the bran and the germ. Okay, then the only thing left along is the rapidly digested starch with a small amount of protein. Okay, then the refined sugars or refined carbohydrates or refined food sources are what we referred as bad carbohydrates. Okay, පැහැදිලිද? අපි මේ refined carbohydrates කියලා කියන්නේ process කරපු carbohydrates. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට මේ grain processing වලදී brand එකයි germ එකයි දෙකම අයින් වෙනවා. එතකොට මේ brand එකේ germ එකේ ගොඩක් තියෙනවා micronutrients such as vitamin B and minerals. So in the refining process, bran as well as germ is removed, and what is remaining is the only the endosperm, which consists of starch. Okay, then this is the refined carbohydrates are considered as bad carbohydrates. Okay, we have to take complex carbohydrates, lots of complex carbohydrates with our diet. Okay, and in general, what we referred as good carbohydrates are the complex carbohydrates, and bad carbohydrates are the refined carbohydrates. Okay, this is again a basic thing. Dietary fibers, as I mentioned, dietary fiber are a type of complex carbohydrates. Most dietary fiber things are carbohydrates, and apart from carbohydrates there are other things also, but this is a kind of concept, dietary fiber. And in biochemistry also you haven't learned anything about dietary fiber, I think. Okay, we cannot explain or describe the biochemistry. Biochemistry means the structure of dietary fiber as this is a kind of nutritional concept. Okay, what we call as dietary fiber are non-digestible things. Okay, මේ dietary fiber කියලා කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම මේක concept එකක්. මේක අපිට කියන්න බෑ මේ dietary fiber කියලා දෙයක්. ඒ කියන්නේ carbohydrate, protein, lipid වගේ අපිට define කරන්න බෑ. නැත්නම් empirical equation එකක් දෙන්න බෑ dietary fiber කියන දෙයට. Okay, then this is a kind of a nutritional concept. Okay, in this content the under the category of dietary fiber, it contains many different kinds of molecules such as cellulose, hemicellulose, pectin, lignin, persistent starch, beta glucans, inulin, and some oligosaccharides. Okay, as well as some waxes and gums also. Okay, most of them are carbohydrates. That's why we usually refer dietary fiber as complex carbohydrates. But you should know that there are other things that are not non-carbohydrate things also categorized under dietary fiber. One thing is lignin. Lignin is not a carbohydrate, and some waxes and some gums, they are not carbohydrates. Okay, then dietary fiber is a diverse group of carbohydrate. We usually elaborate dietary fiber as this, found almost exclusively in plants, including non-starch polysaccharides such as cellulose, hemicellulose, and pectin. Lignin also considered a fiber, but lignin is not a carbohydrate, and there are other examples. Okay, unlike other types of carbohydrates, these are not absorbed in the small intestine to provide energy, but many are fermented by the bacteria in the colon. So that is the basic difference between dietary fiber and other forms of carbohydrates. Then you know that we discussed that major role of carbohydrate is to provide energy. So dietary fiber are type of carbohydrates, but they cannot provide energy because they are not absorbed to the body. The dietary fiber cannot be absorbed to the small intestine and to provide energy. So that is the basic difference between carbohydrates and dietary fiber. You have to understand that very clearly. Okay. Carbohydrate dietary fiber කියලා කියන්නේ අපි සරලව කිව්වොත් එimhe complex carbohydrates. නමුත් dietary fiber කියන category එක අපිට define කරන්න බෑ. මොකද මේ ඒකට වෙන වෙන molecules උත් අයිති වෙනවා. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට lignin, තව gums, තව waxes වගේ දේවලුත් අපි consider කරනවා dietary fibers විදිහට. ඒවා non digestible things. Okay, then the basic difference between dietary fiber and other forms of carbohydrates are that dietary fiber is not digested and they are not absorbed into our bloodstream and they cannot be utilized in producing energy, unlike other carbohydrates. Okay, so that is the basic difference of dietary fiber and other carbohydrates. Okay, then it is mentioned here that unlike other types of carbohydrates, these are not absorbed in the small intestine to provide energy, but many are fermented by the bacteria in the colon. Okay, in some parts of our digestive system, these are not absorbed but fermented by the bacteria available in our gut. Okay, then in the fermentation process, they produce short chain fatty acids like butyric acid, acetic acid, and propionic and valeric like fatty acids. Methane, carbon dioxide, biomass often fermented by the colonic microflora, and this is very important to produce this kind of fatty acids and other things in our gut, because these short chain fatty acids stabilize blood sugar levels after a meal and act on pancreas insulin release and lipid levels, as well as these fatty acids, the short chain fatty acids produced during the fermentation process of dietary fiber helps to improve the colonic environment and regulate the immune responses. And you will under the benefits of dietary fiber, you will learn that there are lots of health effects of dietary fiber. Then it's a basic nutrient that we have to provide with our diet, even though it does not affect or does not provide energy value, unlike other carbohydrates. Okay, then more than half of the usually consumed fibers are degraded in the large intestine, the rest being excreted in the stool. Okay, then but you should know that degraded, what I mentioned as degraded means fermentation. Okay, then they are not absorbed and digested. Okay, then the dietary fiber are non-digestible things. Okay, they are not digested. They are not digested and enter to the bloodstream. Okay, they can ferment, but it is not considered a kind of digestion. It is a kind of fermentation. Okay, and the rest is being excreted in the stool. Even some dietary fiber cannot ferment, then they are excreted from the body with the stool. And when we consider in the physical properties of dietary fiber can absorb water and have bulking property, and this is very important property of dietary fibers. and they can bind with heavy metals and drugs and some toxic compounds. Again, this has a vital importance uh, in preventing cancers. Okay, you will learn why. And also, this dietary fiber can bind with minerals like calcium, magnesium, potassium, and zinc. That is why um, under carbohydrate, under complex carbohydrate, I mentioned that the complex carbohydrates uh, uh, can bind with other nutrients like minerals and vitamins. It is due to the fiber. Okay, then fiber is a kind of complex carbohydrates. Then it can bind with other nutrients such as minerals and vitamins. So when there is fiber-rich foods, then it means generally it contains other micronutrients. Okay. So with that, we can categorize two different types of dietary fiber. They are soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Then the basic difference between the soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber is that soluble fiber dissolves in water, and while insoluble fiber does not dissolve in water. Okay, then the basically what fermentation has been taken place in the digestive system, it means the large intestine are soluble fibers. And insoluble fibers are not ferment and they excrete from our body with the stool. Okay, then the examples for soluble fiber are pectin and some gums. Pectin and some gums dissolve in water. And insoluble fibers, the examples for insoluble fiber are cellulose, lignin, hemicellulose, and waxes, some waxes, and chitin. They are not dissolved in water. Then they excrete and they remove from our body with the stool. Okay, then these are two different forms of fiber. You might have heard about these things definitely. The soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Okay. Then these are the uh, sources of dietary fiber, the major source of dietary fiber. The whole grain cereals and cereal products, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, peas, beans, and pulses. Okay, then these are major sources of dietary fiber. And the components of dietary fiber are found in different proportions in food. Therefore, it is important to eat a variety of fiber containing foods. Then the type of dietary fiber available in these food types is different. Therefore, it is uh, uh, necessary to eat variety of food items in order to fulfill the dietary fiber requirements in our body. In like in carbohydrates, when we consider in the recommended dietary fiber intake for human, uh, we can give these values. Okay, usually for an adult, we have to take uh, more than 30 grams of dietary fiber per day. Okay, then the dietary fiber requirements for adults is higher than that of children. Okay, then it is essential to take dietary fiber in our diet because this has a vital importance in the nutritional point of view. you will understand the benefits of dietary fiber in our body, and it has a variety of role or variety of health benefits in human. Okay, then if we consider the benefits of dietary fiber, the first thing is, you might have heard that about many times. It helps to prevent constipation. It means malabadya. Then what do you know about constipation? It is the initial stage of hemorrhoids. It means ulcers. Okay. Then constipation is impact on individual in lack of dietary fiber with their diets. Okay, then we can observe this condition in stool analysis. And under biochemical analysis, we discussed about direct and indirect nutritional assessment methods. Under the direct nutritional assessment methods, we described about four things as A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Then under biochemical and laboratory methods, if you can remember, stool analysis is a kind of nutritional assessment. So this stool analysis is used to observe the condition of constipation. Okay, then this is a kind of a scale. This is called the Bristol stool scale. And according to this scale, the type 1 and 2 shows the constipation. Okay, it means a lack of fiber in the condition happened due to lack of fiber in our diets. And the 3 and 4 are the ideal kinds of stools. And 5 to 7 depends and going towards the diarrhea. Okay, then this is a kind of nutritional assessment, and we can say that the type 1 and 2 is the condition of constipation. Then one of the major benefits of dietary fiber is to prevent constipation, because this dietary fiber has a bulking effect. It can absorb water, and it helps to form the feces and excrete in our body in a good manner. Okay, and this is one of the major benefit of dietary fiber: prevent constipation. Okay, then the second important fact about dietary fiber, it helps to prevent diverticulitis. Then the diverticulum, or it is the plural form of diverticula. Diverticula are the diverticulum are the pouches on the intestinal wall. These are natural things, but when there is a lack of fiber in our diet, these diverticulum can be infected or can inflammate, and this condition is known as diverticulitis, and we need fiber to prevent diverticulitis. Okay, then මේ diverticulum කියලා කියන්නේ අපේ intestinal tract එකේ මෙන්න මේ වගේ තියෙන pouches. මෙන්න මේ pouches inflame වෙන්න පුළුවන් නැත්නම් infect වෙන්න පුළුවන් සමහර ආහාර වර්ග නිසා. එතකොට මේ fiber මේ diverticulum මත බලපානවා. මේ diverticulum වල infections වළක්වන්න fiber rich ආහාර ගොඩක් වැදගත් වෙනවා. එතකොට අපි කියනවා මේකත් මේ diverticulitis නවත්වන්න fiber ලොකු බලපෑමක් තියෙනවා. Okay, then it is another major health benefit of dietary fiber. Okay, ඔයගොල්ලෝ මම හිතන්නේ කලින් ඔයගොල්ලෝ පොඩි කාලේ ඉඳන් මේ dietary fibers වල importance ඉගෙනගෙන තියෙනවා. ඔයගොල්ලෝ දන්න ප්‍රධානම දේ තමයි මලබද්ධය වළක්වන එක. ඊට අමතරව තව ගොඩක් benefits තියෙනවා dietary fiber වල. Okay, then one of such benefit is that the prevent of diverticulitis. Okay, then there are different conditions like diverticulosis. Diverticulosis is when there is no symptoms seen in the diverticulum, and when diverticulars cause symptoms such as pain, it's called a diverticular disease. And if the diverticula become inflamed and infected, causing more severe symptoms, it is called diverticulitis. Okay, then the fiber basically required to prevent the diverticulitis. Okay, then it's another major health benefits of dietary fiber, prevention of diverticulitis. And dietary fiber also has a effect on reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease because of reducing cholesterol. Okay, then as I mentioned, under the physical properties of dietary fiber, it can bind with different components. Okay, then the dietary fiber can bind with cholesterol and bile acid and remove from the body. Okay, as you know, dietary fiber is not absorbed to the body, and they going through the digestive system and remove as the stool. Then this dietary fiber can bind with different components. Then one such component is cholesterol and bile acids. And cholesterol, the higher cholesterol in our blood, in our vessels, is the major cause of cardiovascular disease. So indirectly, dietary fiber help to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease because of reducing cholesterol. Okay, මේක ගොඩක් වැදගත් දෙයක්. මේක මම හිතන්නේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ අලුතෙන් ඉගෙන ගන්න දෙයක් වෙන්න ඇති. අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් dietary fiber වල වැදගත්කම කියලා අපි කියන්නේ මලබද්ධ. ඊට අමතරව මෙන්න මේ වගේ වැදගත් දේවල් තියෙනවා. එකක් තමයි cardiovascular disease වල risk එක අඩු කරගන්න එක. නැත්නම් මේ cholesterol ශරීරයෙන් අයින් කරගන්න පුළුවන් හොඳ විදියක් dietary fiber intake එක වැඩි කරන්න. මොකද dietary fibers වලට පුළුවන් අනිත් components එක්ක bind වෙන්න. එතකොට dietary fiber ශරීරයට absorb වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒවා කනවා කාලා අපේ digestive system එක හරහා ගිහිල්ලා අපේ stool වලට feces එකත් එක්ක අයින් වෙනවා. එතකොට ඒත් එක්කම ශරීරයේ තියෙන අහිතකර දේවල් මේකට අරගෙන යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ කියන්නේ මල පහත් එක්ක අයින් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. The major problem of cholesterol is that cholesterol is hard to remove from our body, especially from vessels. Okay, that is the major cause of cardiovascular diseases and strokes and other things. Okay, then this is a good way to remove cholesterol from our body. And it also helps with the weight control, because fiber itself has no calories. And you know that fiber cannot produce energy, and it has no caloric effect. and it is not stored in the body. And when there is a adequate amount of fiber in our diets, it provides a full feeling because it's a water absorbing ability, and it's provide satiety, and it's a feeling of less hungry. Okay, then it helps to it helps in weight control. Then fiber rich food require more chewing and slow down the intake of meals and aid in digestion. Thereby, the fiber rich foods help with weight control. Okay, then if we eat uh, simple sugars with no fiber in our diet, then we can eat a lot of simple sugars, because we will not feel full. Then the one of the major important of fiber is that it will provide satiety, or full feeling of full feeling, because the fiber can absorb water, and it has a bulking effect. Okay, then it help with weight control. Okay, and also fiber has a great impact in reducing risk of colon cancers. And this is a kind of a very dangerous cancer type. Okay, then if there is a cancer in colon, it is uh, quite dangerous. Okay, then usually these things happen because of inadequate intake of dietary fiber. Then how dietary fiber can influence on colon cancer is that this dietary fiber can attack prebiotics for beneficial bacteria, and they act on carcinogenic compounds and remove from the body. You know that our digestive system, especially in our intestine, there are desirable bacteria. So then the dietary fiber act as prebiotics. Then what is the difference between prebiotics and probiotics? Under some courses under animal science, you might have heard about probiotics. Then what is probiotics and what is prebiotics? Probiotics කියලා කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? Prebiotics කියලා කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? Probiotics are the desirable bacteria, and prebiotics are the food source for that probiotics. Okay, then dietary fiber are prebiotics. පැහැදිලිද? Probiotics කියලා කියන්නේ අතරම desirable bacteria. Prebiotics කියලා කියන්නේ ඒ bacteria desirable bacteria වලට අවශ්‍ය කරන food source එක. And dietary fiber can attack prebiotics for beneficial bacteria, and these beneficial bacteria can act on carcinogenic compounds and remove from the body. And also dietary fiber helps to remove carcinogenic compounds, and dietary fiber with water make dilution effect on carcinogenic compounds, as well as this dietary fiber helps to keep the colon clean, and that prevents initiation of any pre-cancer cells that may be present. Okay, then this dietary fiber can act as prebiotics, as well as they can bind with some toxic compounds that might be available in the colon. Okay, as well as the pre-cancer cells. Then this dietary fiber helps to remove that such pre-cancer cells, as well as toxic compounds, as well as it act as prebiotics for desirable bacteria. So it has a great impact on colon cancers. Then please add more dietary fiber with your diet, for your diet. Okay, it's very important. And apart from that, it helps to reduce the risk of diabetes. Uh, why it affect on diabetes, or the reduce the risk of diabetes? Because when uh, foods we eat, foods with rich in fiber, we cannot eat lots of uh, amount. Then it indirectly affect to reduce the risk of diabetes or intake of sugars, lot of sugars. So then it indirectly reduce the risk of diabetes, and bulk the stools and make waste move through the digestive tract more quickly and improve the gut health in various ways. So these are the benefits of dietary fiber. Okay, is that clear? Is that clear for you?
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay. We have discussed about dietary fibers as well as about carbohydrates, nutritional aspects of dietary fibers and carbohydrates. And then under this, when we are talking about carbohydrates, we usually uh, find this term glycemic index and glycemic response and glycemic load, such terms. Okay, then in this lecture, I thought it is better to introduce those terms: glycemic index, glycemic response, glycemic load. Okay, then as the next part of this lecture, we will look what is meant by glycemic response, low GI foods, and some related aspects. Okay, glycemic response. In we can say glycemic response as this. When a food rich in carbohydrates is eaten, there is a corresponding rise and subsequent decrease in blood glucose level known as the glycemic response. අපි carbohydrate rich food එකක් නැත්නම් carbohydrate සහිත ආහාරයක් කෑවට පස්සේ අපේ blood glucose level එක වැඩි වෙනවා. Why? There are different types of carbohydrates: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And you know that in our digestive system, polysaccharides and disaccharides are broken down to monosaccharides using the different kinds of enzymes. Okay, then these glucose is absorbed into our blood, and it will increase the blood glucose level. And when we eat in such a carbohydrate food, it increases the blood glucose level and decrease the blood glucose level with time. So that response is called the glycemic response. And the glycemic response totally depend on the type of food as well as the type of individual. Okay, then the glycemic response is different from individual to individual. Okay, or the age group and the gender and other factors, as well as the type of food. It is different from food to food. Okay, then based on that, there is an index called glycemic index. Okay, then it is very important because when we give in advices for diabetic patients, you might have heard that you have to avoid such high GI foods. You have to take a lot of low GI foods, such things. So based on the glycemic response, there is a index called glycemic index. The impact of different carbohydrate containing foods on the glycemic response of the body is classified according to a standard food such as white bread or glucose. Okay, then the glycemic index is based or the glucose or white bread is used as the reference in this glycemic index. We will look what is the glycemic index and how it is calculated, so on. And the measurement is referred as glycemic index. So to have a better understanding or to compare the glycemic responses of different kinds of food, we have an index that is called glycemic index. Okay, then the glycemic response is that when we eat in a carbohydrate rich food, it increases the blood glucose level, and with time it decreases. Okay, that is meant by glycemic response. And then to compare the glycemic response of different foods, we have an index or scale called glycemic index. පැහැදිලිද? Glycemic response කියලා කියන්නේ අපි carbohydrate සහිත ආහාරයක් ගත්තොත් එහෙම අපේ blood glucose එක වැඩි වෙනවා, ඒ වගේම කාලයත් එක්ක අඩු වෙනවා. එතකොට මේක සම්පූර්ණ මේ glycemic response කියන එක වෙනස් වෙනවා පුද්ගලයාට සහ ගන්න ආහාරය මත. Okay, then to compare the glycemic response of different kind of foods, we have an index called glycemic index. And the glycemic index is a rating system for foods containing carbohydrates. It shows how quickly each food affects our body sugar, means our blood sugar, it means glucose level in our blood, when that food is eaten on its own. Okay, then it is a number ranging from 0 to 100, with poor glucose has definitely given the value of 100. In the previous slide also, it is described that the glucose or the white bread is used as the reference material when developing this index. Then the glycemic index ranging from 0 to 100, and pure glucose has 100 in value. And this, when we to develop glycemic or to determine glycemic value of a particular food product, we usually use 10 people without non-blood handling issues like diabetes, and fasted for 12 hours, and then 50 gram of the specific food is given to them, and their blood glucose is monitored by finger stick in every 15 minutes for 2 hours. Okay, then you can further describe as glycemic index here. Then the glycemic index is defined as the ratio between the, actually it's a kind of, it is expressed in the form of 0 to 100 value in between 0 to 100, and it is calculated by dividing the area under the curve of test food. It means the food we eat by area under the curve of standard. Standard means the glucose. Okay, in here what we do is we give the food that we need to determine the glycemic index to a person, and we determine the blood sugar level for 2 hours in every 15 minutes. Okay, then we develop a graph, and the area under that then divided by the reference food, it means glucose. Okay, මෙතනදී අත්තනෝ අපි කරන්නේ glycemic index කියන එක ඇත්තටම අපි සලකන ආහාරය හිතන්න ඒක පාන් වෙන්න පුළුවන් බත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් මොකක් හරි අපි සලකන ආහාරයේ මේ කර්ව් එකේ ඒරියා එක අපි බෙදනවා රෙෆරන්ස් ෆුඩ් එකකින්. රෙෆරන්ස් ෆුඩ් එක කියලා අපි ගන්නෙ ග්ලූකෝස්. ඕකේ. එතකොට මේ chart එක අපි ගන්නවා පැය දෙකකට. හැම විනාඩි 15කටම අපි blood sugar level එක බලනවා. Then this is what I referred as the glycemic response. When we upon eating carbohydrate rich food, it increases the blood glucose level, and with time it decreases. Okay, and that is the glycemic response. To have a comparable idea about the glycemic response, we have developed this index, glycemic index. Okay, the glycemic index of a food is defined as the incremental area under the 2-hour blood glucose response curve following a 12-hour fast and ingestion of a food with a certain quantity of available carbohydrate, usually 50 grams. අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මේ glycemic index එක calculate කරන්න යම් පුද්ගලයෙකුට අපි දෙන්නේ ග්‍රෑම් 50ක වගේ ආහාර ප්‍රමාණයක්. ඒකට මේ glycemic index එක අදලා තියෙන්නේ ඒ ග්‍රෑම් 50ක ප්‍රමාණයට. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි යාට ග්‍රෑම් 50ක් දෙනවා. හිතන්න අපි පාන් වල glycemic index එක calculate කරන්න ඕනේ නම් calculate කරනකොට අදාළ පුද්ගලයාට අපි ඒ අදාළ පුද්ගලයා පැය 12ක් ආහාර ගන්න නැතුව ඉන්න ඕනේ. ඒ වගේම එයාට ඩයබටිස් වගේ කන්ඩිෂන් එකක් නැති වෙන්න ඕනේ. අපි යාට පාන් කෑල්ල දෙනවා. පාන් ඒ ග්‍රෑම් 50ක ප්‍රමාණයක් දීලා කන්න දීලා පැය දෙකක කාලයක් පුරාවටම විනාඩි 15න් 15ට එයාගේ blood glucose level එක මනිනවා. ඒක පුංචි දෙයක් නේ. blood glucose level එක අපිට මනින්න පුළුවන් ලේසියෙන්. එතකොට අපි graph එකක් ගහ ගන්නවා blood glucose level එකයි time එකයි අතර. මේ විදිහට. That is the test food. And then we give the reference food. It means the glucose, 50 gram of glucose, and we do the same. So GI is calculated by dividing the area under the curve of test food by the area under the curve of standard and multiplying by 100. From that value, we can have a value in between 0 to 100. And you know that the GI 100, the glycemic index value is 100 for glucose because the reference food and both upper and lower value are same. Then it becomes 100. Glucose ගත්තොත් එimhe glucose වලට 100 එන්නේ reference food එක වෙන්නේ glucose. කියන්නේ standard එක වෙන්නේ glucose. ඒ වගේම test food එක වෙන්නේ glucose. එතකොට උඩයි යටයි එකම value එක එන්නේ. එතකොට මේක 100 වැඩි කරාම 100. Then GI or the glycemic index value for pure glucose is 100. So it is not all foods contain pure glucose. Then we can have a value in between 0 to 100. So that is what is meant by glycemic index. And when we consider the glycemic index ranking for foods, we can divide foods into different categories based on that glycemic index value. We define low GI foods for the foods which have 0 to 55 glycemic index value. Okay, and these foods produce only small fluctuations in blood glucose, hence insulin levels. Then low GI foods means it will not increase blood glucose level very highly. Okay, then මෙතන මේක මේ blood glucose level එක කෙටි කාලයකින් වැඩි කරනවා නම් glycemic index එක මොකක්ද කියන්න පුළුවන්. ඒක වැඩිද අඩුයිද? What can you say? If a particular food increases the blood glucose level within a short period of time, what can you say about this value, GI value? Is it high or low? if a particular
I
specific food, if it is increased the blood glucose level within a short period of time, what can you say? The GI value is high or low. හිතන්න මේ අපි සලකන ආහාරය blood glucose level එක ආහාරය ගත්ත ගමන් වැඩි කරනවා. ඒ කියලා කියන්නේ මෙන්න මේ වගේ response එකක් තියෙනවා. ඒතර ඒ වගේ response එකක් තියෙනවා නම් මේ GI value එක වැඩිද අඩුයිද? You know that yes, it has a higher value. Because you know that when the upper value is increased, the lower value is always standard or constant. Then when the upper value is increased, then the GI value is it has a higher GI value. So it is not good for in terms of our health. When the blood glucose level increase rapidly, it means that it increases the insulin levels rapidly. Then it is not good. Okay. And these type of foods are called high GI foods. Produce large fluctuations in blood glucose, hence insulin levels. Then it is not good. Then the intake of high GI foods for a longer period of time, that is the basic cause for diabetes and is basically the diabetes. Okay, then we call as high GI foods for the foods which have glycemic index value 70 or more, and in between the 56 to 69 we call such foods as moderate or medium GI foods. Okay, that is how this classification works: low GI foods, high GI foods, and medium GI foods. Okay, it is always recommended to eat low GI foods or low glycemic index foods, because it will not fluctuate the blood glucose level heavily. Okay, then when we consume a food and it will when it fluctuate the blood glucose level heavily, it means we have to do a lot of regulatory actions in our body. We have to do lots of hormonal actions. The insulin levels should be changed rapidly, so it is not good for our health. So that is the reason for diabetes. Okay, then when the insulin is not work properly as of this the condition, it means when we take in the higher GI foods, insulin should be always worked hard, and upon a tolerable level, upon some control limit, then insulin cannot work. The glands that work on producing insulin and releasing, then they will get tired. Then it will become a malfunction upon higher intake of these high GI foods for a longer period of time. Then they will not work further. So that is the reason for diabetes. In diabetic patients, they have to inject insulin when blood glucose level increased. Okay, so this is the GI ranking for food. We call raw GI foods for the foods which have 0 to 55 GI value, glycemic index value, and for high GI foods it has 70 or more glycemic index value. And these are and also we should know that the GI values may vary widely between different types of the same food item. For example, Canadian carrot have GI value of 92, which is considered high GI value. On the other hand, Romanian carrots have GI of 60. And also GI can have an effect on the ripening stage. And for example, banana has a GI of 47 to 62 depending on the how ripe it is. මේ glycemic index කියන එක totally different වෙනවා food type එකක් අනුව. ඒ කියන්නේ same food එක වුණත් ඒකේ variety එක අනුව GI value එක වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. But GI is a good index to understand the glycemic response of that foods and to compare the glycemic index of foods and to avoid the foods that are not desirable for our health. Okay. Then these are few examples for low GI foods. Say string hopper, the GI value is 50. Plantain, it's 50. And papaya, it's 34. Green grams, 31. And peanut is 14. And these are few examples for medium GI foods. See, wheat flour, bread is 68. Bun is 67. Red rice is 60. Idli, it's 58. So these are few examples. And these are few examples for high GI foods. Honey, 79. Watermelon, it's 72. French fries, 75. So white rice, it's 89. The most negative aspect of high GI food is that it will increase the blood sugar level highly within a short period of time, and it lead to fluctuate the insulin levels and the blood sugar levels heavily. Okay, so that is the basic difference between high GI foods and the low GI foods. And these are the risks associated with high GI foods. Cause rapid and strong increase in blood sugar levels, thereby increasing diabetes risk, and may cause insulin resistance, and can associate with weight gain and increased appetite, because high GI foods can eat with larger quantities, and thereby we can eat a lot these type of foods, because the foods are easily digested and enter to the bloodstream. Then we can eat a lot, so it increase the appetite, thereby the associated with the weight gain as well as the fat storage, because these excess glucose finally end up with fat. So these are the risks associated with high GI foods. Okay. Then this graph shows how our blood glucose level increases and varies depending on the two types of diets: the high glycemic index meal and low glycemic index meal. So when we consume the high glycemic index meal, we have to work hard to regulate the blood glucose level. It means we have to produce insulin a lot, and we have to convert the glucose into a glycogen, and sometimes the glucose into fat, and we have to regulate, and we have to work hard. Our body need to work hard. Okay. On the other hand, when someone consume low glycemic index meal, then the regulation is very easy. So that is the difference between high GI and low GI foods, and we have to avoid high GI foods and excessive intake of high GI foods. You know the reason now. Okay. And one limitation of glycemic index is that, if you can remember, one limitation of GI value is that they do not reflect the quantity we eat from a particular food. Okay, then when calculating the glycemic index, we always consider 50 gram of the food product. Okay, but sometimes we will not eat 50 gram of a particular food. Okay, for example, watermelon. Sometimes we will not, according to this classification, watermelon is a high GI food. Okay, but sometimes we may not eat exactly 50 gram of watermelon. Okay, then the GI value is calculated for 50 gram of watermelon. මේ glycemic index කෙනෙක් calculate කරලා තියෙන 50 gram of the food item for 50 gram of food item. Okay, අපි සමහරලාට ඒ ආහාරයෙන් හරියටම ග්‍රෑම් 50ක් කන්න නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. අපිට අඩුවෙන් කන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට ඒක glycemic index එකේ එක limitation එක ප්‍රධාන limitation එක. පැහැදිලිද ඒක?
Yes, sir.
මේ glycemic index calculate කරලා තියෙන්නේ අපි සලකන ආහාරයේ ග්‍රෑම් 50කට. නමුත් අපි සමහර වෙලාවට ග්‍රෑම් 50ක් ඒ සලකන ආහාරයෙන් ගන්න නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට මෙතන ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා. To overcome that issue, scientists have designed the glycemic load. Okay, then the glycemic load is calculated by multiplying the amount of carbohydrate in the particular portion we take and by dividing 100. Glycemic index එක අපි ගන්න ප්‍රමාණය, අපි ගන්න portion එකේ තියෙන carbohydrate ප්‍රමාණයෙන් වැඩි කරලා CM බෙදුවට පස්සේ glycemic load කියලා එකක් ලැබෙනවා. Then this glycemic load is heavily to overcome the limitation of that glycemic index. And also the glycemic load is more reliable than the glycemic index known, because it takes into account the amount of carbohydrate in the portion of food together with the how quickly it raises the blood glucose level. පැහැදිලිද? මේ glycemic load කියන එක calculate කරනකොට අපි සලකනවා අපි ගන්න ආහාරයේ ප්‍රමාණය. ඒ කියන්නේ හිතන්නකෝ, එතකොට මේ glycemic load කියන එක අපි ගන්න ආහාර ප්‍රමාණය මත වෙනස් වෙනවා. පැහැදිලිද? එතකොට හිතන්නකෝ දැන් watermelon එකක් වුණත් අපි ග්‍රෑම් 40ක් ගත්තොත් එහෙම glycemic load එක අඩුයි. අපි ග්‍රෑම් 80ක් ගත්තොත් එහෙම glycemic load එක වැඩි. අපි ග්‍රෑම් 180ක් ගත්තොත් එහෙම glycemic load එක ඊට වඩා වැඩි. එතකොට අපිට idea එකක් එනවා අපි කොච්චර ප්‍රමාණයක් කන්න ඕනේද කියලා. ප්‍රධාන limitation එක තමයි glycemic index එකේ ඒක constant value එකක් තියෙන 50 ග්‍රෑම්. නමුත් අපි හැම food එකම ග්‍රෑම් 50ක් කන්න නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. නැත්නම් අපි ඊට වඩා කන්න පුළුවන්. පැහැදිලිද? And to overcome that issue, nowadays we use glycemic load. අපි glycemic index ගැන කතා කරේ දැන් ටිකක් කාලයකට කලින්. නමුත් අපි දැන් කතා කරන්නේ ගොඩක් glycemic load එක ගැන. We have to know that. Okay. Then this is the difference between the difference between the levels of glycemic index and the glycemic load. As I mentioned earlier, we refer the low GI foods as the foods which have glycemic index value of 0 to 55, and the medium GI foods as the glycemic index values of 56 to 69, and high GI foods as the glycemic index values with 70 plus. And on the other hand, glycemic load, we refer low glycemic load foods as foods which have glycemic load 0 to 100, 0 to 10, and medium glycemic load foods as foods which have glycemic load of 11 to 19, and 20 or over called high GL foods. Okay, then when we rely on glycemic load, we have to consider the portion size or the particular amount we eat. Okay, then from that we can calculate the glycemic load. එතන glycemic load එකක්දී හිතන්නකෝ අපි watermelon එකෙන් ග්‍රෑම් 40යි කන්නේ. නමුත් අපි මෙතනට පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ 40යි ග්‍රෑම් කියන එක නෙමෙයි. මේ 40යි ග්‍රෑම් වල තියෙන කාබෝහයිඩ්‍රේට් ප්‍රමාණය. ඒක වැදගත් දෙයක්. ඒ ග්‍රෑම් 40 තියෙන කාබෝහයිඩ්‍රේට් ප්‍රමාණය අපිට නියුට්‍රිෂනල් chart එකකින් හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට අපි දන්නවා මේ watermelon වල 90%ක්ම තියෙන්නේ වතුර, moisture. And 100, then it may contain about 5% of starch or carbohydrate. Okay. Then from when we eat in 40 gram of such food product, the actual carbohydrate amount may be about 2 grams. Okay, but in glycemic index calculations, we do not consider that. එතකොට මේ glycemic load කියන එක glycemic index කියන එක ගොඩක් reliable measurement එකක්. අපි ඉස්සර තමයි glycemic index කියන ඉස්සර කියලා කියන ගොඩක් ඉස්සර නෙමෙයි මේක. This was developed in 1980s glycemic index measurements, but very recently nowadays we use glycemic load. Okay, is that clear? Badly either.
Yes, sir.
Then you should know how to calculate glycemic load as well as glycemic index. Okay, then this is very important thing. Most people even now they all about low GI food, high GI foods, but as students who are learning science and nutrition, you should know to use glycemic load instead of glycemic index, and this is for reliable measure and glycemic index. Okay, find about these things. These are freely available in the internet, and these are very interesting things to learn. And I ask you to find about resistant starch, modified starch, and sugar alcohols. Okay, these things might appear in your exams. Therefore, please do your homework. And අපි ඉස්සර තමයි ඇත්තටම ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැනගන්න ඕනේ අලුත් දේවල්. මොකද අපි පරණ දැනුම අරගෙන වැඩක් නැහැ. අපි ලෝකේ යන විදිහට දේවල් ඉගෙන ගන්න ඕනේ. අලුත් අපේ දැනුම අප්ඩේට් කරගන්න. ඇත්තටම දැන් අපි dietary fiber කියලා දෙයක් කතා කරන්නේත් නැහැ. දැන් dietary fiber කියලා අපි කතා කරන්නේ නැත්නම් nutrition වල. ඔයගොල්ලෝ biochemistry පොතක් ගත්තොත් එහෙම dietary fiber කියන වචනයක්වත් නැහැ. මොකද ඇත්තටම dietary fiber කියලා එකක් මොකොත් එහෙම දෙයක් අපේ මේ explain කරන්න බෑ. අපි ඒක nutrition වලට අදාගත්ත concept එකක්. එතකොට දැන් අපි dietary fiber කියන එක වෙනුවට අපි පාවිච්චි කරනවා මෙන්න මේ වචන resistant starch, modified starch නැත්නම් මෙන්න මේ වගේ දේවල් dietary fiber කියන එක replace වෙලා තියෙනවා මේ වගේ දේවල් වලින්. So you need to know that. Okay, then find about these things. And this has these things have wide applications nowadays in the food industry as well as in other industries. Okay, then that's what I wanted to discuss with you. Okay, and go through these things. These are not rocket science. You can understand these things very clearly. And I will upload one good reference book to understand these concepts in LMS and utilize the resources. Okay, then if you do not have anything to clarify, I'll stop from here, and we will hopefully meet on Wednesday. Thank you.